I turned 18, and my dad kicked me out with no explanation. Then I discovered why he could never look me in the eyes. The morning of my 18th birthday, I woke up to find my father standing at the foot of my bed, holding a baseball bat. Not threateningly, but like he needed something solid to grip while delivering news that would shatter everything I thought I knew about our family. His hands were shaking, and there were tears streaming down his face that he wasn't bothering to wipe away. "Get out," he said, in a voice so broken it barely sounded human. "Get out right now and never come back. Don't ask questions. Don't try to contact me. Just go." He dropped a manila envelope on my bed and turned away, his shoulders heaving with suppressed sobs that echoed through our small house like gunshots. I sat up, completely disoriented and terrified by the raw pain in his voice. This wasn't anger or disappointment. This was anguish so profound it seemed to be tearing him apart from the inside. "Dad, what's wrong? What happened? Did someone die?" But he was already walking away, his footsteps heavy and final on the hardwood floor. The envelope contained $2,000 in cash, my birth certificate, social security card, and a single sentence written in his handwriting. "I'm sorry, Trevor. I can't look at you anymore without seeing what I did." The words made no sense, but they filled me with a dread so complete I could taste metal in my mouth. I found my belongings packed in garbage bags on the front porch, hastily but thoroughly gathered like he'd been planning this moment for weeks. My computer, clothes, books, the hockey trophies I'd earned in high school. Everything that proved I'd existed in this house for 18 years, now reduced to plastic bags waiting by the curb. "Dad, please!" I pounded on the front door, but he'd already engaged every lock. Through the window, I could see him sitting at our kitchen table with his head in his hands, his entire body shaking with the kind of grief I'd only seen at funerals. He looked like someone who'd just buried his only child. My neighbor, Mrs. Sullivan, appeared beside me with a concerned expression and a cordless phone in her hand. "Trevor, honey, what's happening? Your father called 20 minutes ago asking if I could give you a ride somewhere. He sounded absolutely destroyed." She studied my face carefully, clearly trying to determine if I was safe. "I don't know what's happening," I said, my voice cracking with panic and confusion. "He just told me to leave and never come back. He won't tell me why." Mrs. Sullivan looked through the window at my father, who was now rocking back and forth like someone trying to comfort himself through unbearable pain. She drove me to my best friend Danny's house, where his mother took one look at my face and immediately started making phone calls to find me temporary housing. The story spread quickly through our small town's network of concerned parents. Good kid kicked out on his birthday by a father who'd never shown any signs of instability or cruelty. Danny's family let me stay in their guest room while I tried to figure out what had triggered my father's breakdown. I called his workplace, but they said he'd taken indefinite leave starting that morning. I called our relatives, but nobody had heard from him in weeks. It was like he'd planned to disappear from my life as completely as possible. The first clue came when I was going through my belongings and found a letter I'd never seen before, hidden in the bottom of my laundry bag. It was addressed to me, but had never been opened, postmarked 3 months earlier. The return address showed it was from someone named Detective Rita Vasquez with the state police. Inside the letter was a request for me to contact her regarding new developments in a case that may involve your family. She provided her phone number and mentioned that she'd tried calling our house multiple times but had been told I wasn't available. The letter was dated just after my father's behavior had started becoming increasingly strange and distant. I called Detective Vasquez from Danny's house, my hands shaking as I dialed. She answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting for my call. "Trevor Morrison?" she said, recognizing my voice immediately. "I've been trying to reach you for months. We need to talk in person. This isn't a conversation for the phone." She agreed to meet me at a diner downtown, away from Danny's family, so they wouldn't overhear whatever revelation was about to destroy my understanding of reality. Detective Vasquez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the careful manner of someone who delivered terrible news professionally. "Trevor, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything you think you know about your family," she said, sliding a thick folder across the table. 3 months ago, we reopened a cold case from 18 years ago, a hit-and-run accident that killed a pregnant woman named Amanda Chen. My blood turned to ice. "I don't understand what this has to do with my family," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I was calculating dates and realizing with growing horror that 18 years ago was exactly when I was born. The coincidence felt too precise to be random. Detective Vasquez opened the folder and showed me crime scene photos that made my stomach turn. A car wrapped around a tree, emergency vehicles with flashing lights, a stretcher covered with a white sheet. The victim was 22 years old and 8 months pregnant. The baby was delivered by emergency cesarean section but survived. "The driver who caused the accident fled the scene," she continued, her voice gentle but relentless. "We never found him. No witnesses, no security cameras in that area, no physical evidence left behind. The case went cold until 3 months ago, when new DNA technology allowed us to test evidence we couldn't analyze before." She pulled out a DNA report that might as well have been written in a foreign language for all I could understand of the technical details. But Detective Vasquez translated the crucial information. The blood found on the victim's car didn't belong to her. It belonged to the person who hit her and kept driving while she died alone on that road. We ran the DNA through the national database and got a match, she said, watching my face carefully as she prepared to deliver the blow that would split my world in half. The blood belongs to your father, Trevor. Richard Morrison was the drunk driver who killed Amanda Chen and orphaned her unborn child. The diner around me seemed to tilt sideways as the implications crashed over me like a tsunami. My father hadn't just killed a pregnant woman, he'd killed my biological mother. The woman who'd died giving birth to me had been murdered by the man who'd raised me, and he'd somehow arranged to adopt the child whose life he'd destroyed before it began. How is that possible? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the ringing in my ears. How could he adopt me after killing my mother? How could the system allow that? Detective Vasquez looked uncomfortable, like she was about to reveal corruption that went deeper than one man's crime. Your father was a court clerk 18 years ago, she explained. He had access to case files and adoption records. He knew about the baby who survived the crash, and he manipulated the paperwork to appear as a suitable adoptive parent. The social worker who approved the adoption was his girlfriend at the time. The conspiracy was more elaborate than I could have imagined. My father hadn't just committed vehicular homicide and fled the scene. He'd systematically corrupted the adoption process to gain custody of his victim's child. He'd spent 18 years raising the son of the woman he'd killed, living with the knowledge of what he'd done every single day. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Detective Vasquez confirmed my worst fears. They had enough evidence to arrest my father for murder, and they wanted me to help them locate him since he'd stopped showing up at work and wasn't answering his phone. We have a warrant for his arrest, she said, showing me legal documents that transformed my father from the man who'd raised me into a fugitive from justice. Trevor, I need you to understand that you're not in any trouble. You're a victim in this situation, just like your biological mother was. I left that meeting feeling like my entire identity had been erased and rewritten in the span of an hour. The man I'd called Dad for 18 years was actually my mother's killer. The life I'd been living was built on a foundation of murder and deception so profound that every memory I had was now tainted with horror. Back at Danny's house, I locked myself in the guest room and tried to process what I'd learned. Every birthday cake my father had bought me, every bedtime story he'd read, every proud moment he'd shared when I accomplished something, all of it had been shadowed by his knowledge that he'd killed my real mother and stolen me from whatever family I should have grown up with. The worst part was understanding why he'd never been able to look me in the eyes. I'd spent my entire childhood wondering why my father seemed distant and uncomfortable around me, why he acted like my presence caused him physical pain. Now I knew it was because every time he looked at my face, he saw the woman he'd killed and the child he'd orphaned. Danny's mother knocked on my door that evening with a tray of food I couldn't eat and news that made everything worse. Trevor, honey, there are police cars at your house and news vans. Someone leaked the story to the press. She handed me her tablet, and I saw my own school photo next to a headline that read, "Local man adopts child after killing his mother in hit and run." The story had every horrific detail. My father's crime, his manipulation of the adoption system, the 18 years he'd spent raising me while hiding the truth about my origins. The comments section was filled with people debating whether I was a victim or somehow complicit, whether my father's actions were evil or tragically romantic. Within hours, reporters were calling Danny's house asking for interviews. Neighbors were giving statements about what a quiet, normal family we'd seemed to be. My high school teachers were expressing shock that one of their students had been living such a dark secret without anyone suspecting the truth. Detective Vasquez called that night to warn me that my father was still missing and might try to contact me. Trevor, if he reaches out, you need to call me immediately. He's facing life in prison, and desperate people make unpredictable choices. He might try to hurt you or himself rather than face the consequences. The possibility that my father might be planning suicide added another layer of horror to an already unbearable situation. Despite everything I'd learned about him, he was still the only parent I'd ever known. The idea of him dying while I was struggling with hatred and love in equal measure felt like it would destroy whatever sanity I had left. 3 days after the story broke, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting and a small wooden box I recognized from his bedroom dresser. The letter was 12 pages long, and reading it felt like watching someone confess their sins while standing on the edge of a cliff. Trevor, it began, by the time you read this, you'll know the truth about what I did and who you really are. I want you to understand that every day I spent raising you was both the greatest joy and the deepest torment of my life. You are so much like her, your mother, Amanda, that sometimes I forgot you weren't actually her ghost come back to haunt me. The letter detailed the night of the accident in excruciating detail. My father had been drinking heavily after losing his job, driving home on back roads to avoid police checkpoints. He'd been going nearly 70 miles per hour when my mother's car pulled out of a driveway ahead of him. The impact was so violent, it killed her instantly and sent his own car spinning into a ditch. I should have called 911 immediately, he wrote, but I was drunk and panicked and facing prison time. I left her there and drove home, spending the next 3 hours cleaning blood off my car and sobering up. By morning, I'd convinced myself I could keep the secret forever. But the secret had eaten away at him for 18 years, especially after he'd learned that Amanda Chen had been pregnant and that her baby had survived the crash. His decision to adopt me hadn't been about covering his tracks. It had been about trying to atone for his crime by giving Amanda's child the life he'd stolen from her. I thought if I could raise you properly, if I could love you and provide for you, it would somehow balance the scales, he continued. But every milestone in your life reminded me that your real mother would never see you graduate or play hockey or become the incredible young man you've grown into. The wooden box contained items that had belonged to my biological mother: her driver's license, a few photos, a piece of jewelry she'd been wearing the night she died. There was also a sealed envelope labeled, "For Trevor on his 18th birthday," written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside that envelope was a letter my biological mother had written to me while she was pregnant, apparently planning to give it to me when I became an adult. "My dear baby," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to tell you these things in person. I want you to know that you were planned and wanted and loved before you were even born." She wrote about her hopes for my future, her excitement about becoming a mother, her dreams of the relationship we'd have as I grew up. She'd included ultrasound photos and a playlist of songs she'd planned to sing to me as lullabies. The letter was full of love and anticipation for a life together that had been stolen by my father's selfish decision to drive drunk. Reading my biological mother's words while knowing my adoptive father had killed her created a psychological conflict I couldn't resolve. She died loving me and planning our future together. He'd spent 18 years loving me while carrying the guilt of destroying that future. Both emotions were real, but they couldn't coexist in my mind without tearing me apart. Danny's family had been patient and supportive, but I could see the strain my presence was putting on their household. News vans still parked outside their house. Reporters called constantly. Their neighbors were gossiping about their decision to shelter me. I was becoming a burden on people who'd done nothing wrong except show kindness to someone in crisis. Detective Vasquez called with an update that made everything more complicated. They'd found my father's car abandoned near a bridge over the Clearwater River, along with a note suggesting he'd jumped. Search teams were dragging the water, but the current was strong and the chances of finding a body were slim. "Trevor, I need to ask you directly," she said. "Have you had any contact with your father since he disappeared? Any phone calls, letters, messages through third parties?" Her tone suggested she suspected my father might still be alive and that I might be helping him evade capture. "Just the letter I showed you," I said honestly. "Detective Vasquez, do you think he's really dead?" The question hung between us like a challenge. She was quiet for a long moment before admitting that suicide seemed like the most likely outcome for someone facing life in prison for a crime that had defined his entire adult life. But doubt nagged at me over the following days. My father was methodical and careful, the kind of man who planned every detail of his life. The idea that he'd kill himself impulsively without ensuring I'd have support and resources seemed inconsistent with the parent I'd known, regardless of his crimes. A week after his disappearance, I received another package. This time it contained keys to a storage unit across town and instructions to go there alone. "Trevor," the accompanying note read, "there are things you need to see before you decide what kind of man your father was. Unit 247. Go by yourself. Trust no one else with this information." The storage unit was in a facility that looked like it had been abandoned for years, the kind of place where people stored things they never intended to retrieve. Unit 247 was in the back corner, hidden from view of the main office. When I opened it with the key my father had provided, I found a space that looked like a memorial to my biological mother. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings about the accident, photos of Amanda Chen from high school and college, copies of police reports and medical records. There were boxes of her personal belongings that he must have somehow obtained: clothes, jewelry, letters from friends, books with her notes in the margins. In the center of the space was a desk with a computer that was still running. When I touched the mouse, the screen lit up showing a document titled "The Truth About Amanda." It was a detailed confession, but not the one I'd expected. Instead of taking responsibility for killing my mother, my father was claiming he'd been framed. According to the document, my father had been at a bar the night of the accident, but he hadn't been alone. He'd been with his girlfriend, Sarah Williams, the social worker who'd later approved my adoption. They'd left together around midnight, and she'd insisted on driving because he'd been drinking. "Sarah was the one driving my car when we hit Amanda," the confession continued. "She panicked and begged me to take the blame because she'd lose her job and face prison time. I was already drunk and disoriented from the impact. She convinced me that I was responsible even though she'd been behind the wheel." The storage unit contained evidence to support this version of events. Photos showing Sarah Williams driving my father's car on previous occasions, credit card receipts proving they'd been together that night, even audio recordings of phone calls where she'd coached him on how to handle police questioning. But the most shocking revelation was saved for last. According to my father's research, Sarah Williams had known Amanda Chen personally. They'd gone to high school together and had maintained a complicated friendship that involved competition over jobs, men, and social status. The accident might not have been random at all. My father's investigation suggested that Sarah had deliberately chosen to drive down the road where Amanda lived, at a time when she knew Amanda would be coming home from her night shift at the hospital. The collision might have been premeditated murder disguised as a drunk driving accident, with my father as the unwitting accomplice who'd been manipulated into taking responsibility. The implications were staggering. If my father was telling the truth, then Sarah Williams had murdered my biological mother, convinced him he was responsible, and then used her position as a social worker to gain access to me through the adoption process. She'd been part of my life throughout my childhood, the woman I'd known as Aunt Sarah, who brought birthday presents and Christmas gifts. I sat in that storage unit for hours, reading through 18 years of evidence my father had compiled while trying to prove his innocence. Bank records, phone logs, witness statements, psychological evaluations, everything pointed to Sarah Williams as the real killer, and my father as her victim almost as much as my mother had been. But why had he run away instead of presenting this evidence to the police? The answer was in the final folder. Sarah Williams had been promoted to District Supervisor for Child Protective Services. She had the power to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and control narratives about child welfare cases. My father had tried to expose her before and been threatened with harm to me if he continued investigating. She told me that if I ever tried to implicate her, she'd claim I'd been abusing you sexually for years, one document revealed. She had the authority to remove you from my custody and place you in foster care where anything could happen to you. I chose protecting you over proving my innocence. The storage unit also contained evidence that Sarah Williams had been monitoring my life through her position in social services. She'd received regular reports on my school performance, medical records, even psychological evaluations I'd never known existed. She'd been watching me grow up, probably waiting for signs that I'd inherited my mother's intelligence or curiosity. I left the storage unit feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet once again. If my father was telling the truth, then the woman I'd trusted as a family friend had murdered my mother and spent 18 years manipulating both my father and me. But if he was lying, then this was an elaborate deception designed to make me doubt everything I'd learned about his guilt. Detective Vasquez needed to see this evidence, but my father's note had specifically warned me not to trust law enforcement. Sarah Williams has allies in the police department, he'd written. She's been covering her tracks for 18 years. The detective handling the case might be working with her. I decided to research Detective Vasquez independently before sharing my father's accusations. What I found made my suspicions grow stronger. She'd been promoted to her current position by the same captain who'd originally handled my mother's case. She'd worked closely with social services on multiple cases involving Sarah Williams. The connections might be innocent, but they could also indicate a deeper conspiracy. Instead of calling Detective Vasquez, I contacted a private investigator named Marcus Cole who specialized in police corruption cases. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop outside town, away from anyone who might report our conversation back to Sarah Williams or her allies. Marcus Cole was a former FBI agent who'd been forced out of the bureau for exposing misconduct by his colleagues. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just absorbing the complexity of what I was describing. When I finished, he asked to see the evidence from the storage unit. "If what your father documented is accurate," Marcus said after reviewing the files, "then this is one of the most sophisticated cover-ups I've ever seen. Sarah Williams didn't just commit murder, she orchestrated an 18-year campaign to control the narrative and eliminate threats to her secret." He explained that my father's evidence was substantial, but circumstantial. A good defense attorney could create reasonable doubt, but the case against Sarah Williams wouldn't be strong enough to guarantee conviction. Worse, if she suspected we were investigating her, she might escalate her efforts to silence anyone who could expose her crimes. "Trevor, you need to understand that you're in serious danger," Marcus continued. "If Sarah Williams killed your mother to cover up some previous crime or personal vendetta, she won't hesitate to hurt you to protect herself, and she has the resources and connections to make you disappear without anyone questioning her story." That night, I lay awake in Danny's guest room, thinking about all the times Aunt Sarah had been present during my childhood. Family dinners, birthday parties, school events. She'd inserted herself into our lives so completely that I'd never questioned her constant presence. Now I wondered if she'd been monitoring me for signs that I might discover the truth about my origins. The next morning, Danny's mother knocked on my door with a concerned expression. "Trevor, there's someone here to see you. A woman named Sarah Williams who says she's from social services. She's asking about your living situation and wants to discuss your future care arrangements." My blood turned to ice. Sarah had found me, and she was here under the pretense of helping me transition to independent living. But after reading my father's evidence, I knew she was really here to assess whether I posed a threat to her secret. One wrong word from me could expose 18 years of lies and manipulation. I asked Danny's mother to tell Sarah I was still sleeping and needed a few more hours. As soon as she left, I called Marcus Cole and explained the situation. His response was immediate and terrifying. "Don't talk to her alone under any circumstances. If she's as dangerous as your father believed, this visit means she's preparing to eliminate you as a witness." Marcus arranged to meet me at the back of the house within 30 minutes, but Sarah Williams was already at the front door asking increasingly insistent questions about my whereabouts. I could hear her telling Danny's mother that she had legal authority to remove me from their custody if they continued obstructing her investigation. I climbed out the guest room window and ran through the neighbors' backyards toward the meeting point Marcus had specified. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's voice becoming sharper and more demanding as she realized I was avoiding her. The woman who'd brought me birthday presents for 18 years was now hunting me like prey. Marcus was waiting in his car at the end of the block, engine running and eyes scanning for threats. "Get in," he said as I approached. "We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out our next move." As we drove away, I saw Sarah Williams exit Danny's house and look directly at us, her expression shifting from concerned social worker to something much more predatory. "She knows we're onto her," I said, watching Sarah through the rear window as she made a phone call that looked urgent and angry. Marcus nodded grimly and pressed harder on the accelerator, taking us toward a safe house he'd prepared for witnesses in dangerous situations. The safe house was a cabin in the mountains, isolated enough that visitors could be spotted from miles away. Marcus had stocked it with food, communications equipment, and weapons in case Sarah Williams decided to escalate beyond manipulation and legal threats. He explained that we were now in a race against time to expose her crimes before she could silence us permanently. "Your father spent 18 years collecting evidence against Sarah," Marcus explained, as we reviewed the files in the cabin's main room. "But he made the mistake of warning her that he was investigating her. She's had time to prepare countermeasures and eliminate witnesses. We need to move fast before she destroys what's left of the proof." That evening, Marcus received a call from his contacts in the FBI. Sarah Williams had reported me as a runaway juvenile who might be dangerous due to trauma from learning about my father's crimes. She'd requested federal assistance in locating me, claiming I needed immediate psychological intervention to prevent self-harm or violence against others. "She's using the system against you," Marcus explained. "Every law enforcement agency in the state is now looking for you, and they think they're trying to save a troubled kid from making tragic mistakes. If they find you, they'll deliver you right back to the woman who killed your mother." The situation seemed hopeless until Marcus revealed that my father wasn't actually dead. He'd been hiding in a cabin similar to this one, waiting for the right moment to surface with evidence that could finally expose Sarah Williams. But his plan required me to play a specific role that would put me directly in harm's way. "Your father wants to meet with Sarah Williams and offer to confess publicly to your mother's murder," Marcus explained. "But only if she agrees to leave you alone and let you live your life without interference. He's hoping she'll incriminate herself during that conversation, which we'll record as evidence." The plan was dangerous because it required my father to expose himself to capture while trusting that Sarah wouldn't simply kill both of us to eliminate all threats to her secret. But it was also our only chance to gather the kind of evidence that would convince authorities to investigate her involvement in my mother's death. 2 days later, my father emerged from hiding and contacted Sarah Williams directly. He proposed a meeting at an abandoned warehouse outside town, claiming he wanted to negotiate terms for his surrender that would protect me from further harassment. Sarah agreed immediately, probably recognizing this as her opportunity to eliminate the last witnesses who could expose her crimes. Marcus and I arrived at the warehouse hours before the scheduled meeting, setting up surveillance equipment and recording devices that would capture everything Sarah said. My role was to remain hidden, but close enough to intervene if she tried to harm my father before he could get her confession on tape. When Sarah Williams arrived at the warehouse, she wasn't alone. 2 men accompanied her, both carrying weapons and moving like professional killers rather than social workers. My father had walked into a trap, but he'd also brought insurance. FBI agents Marcus had contacted were positioned around the building, ready to move in once they had evidence of Sarah's crimes. The conversation that followed was recorded from multiple angles and would later become the centerpiece of Sarah Williams's prosecution for murder. She confessed to killing my mother in a moment of rage over a promotion Amanda had received, then manipulating my father into believing he was responsible while using her position to cover up evidence of her involvement. "Richard, you've been useful for 18 years, she told my father, as her associates moved to surround him. "But Trevor is becoming too curious about his origins, and you've obviously told him too much. It's time to end this charade permanently." She pulled out a gun, apparently planning to kill my father and claim he'd threatened her during their meeting. That's when the FBI agents moved in, surrounding the warehouse and arresting Sarah Williams and her accomplices before they could harm anyone. The recording equipment had captured her confession to murdering my mother, 18 years of evidence tampering, and conspiracy to commit additional murders. The arrest made national news, partly because of the complexity of the case and partly because of the corruption it revealed within social services and local law enforcement. Sarah Williams had used her position to cover up her crime while manipulating everyone involved, including the child she'd orphaned and the man she'd convinced to take responsibility for her actions. My father was cleared of all charges related to my mother's death, though he still faced consequences for helping cover up the crime initially. He received probation and community service, along with mandatory counseling to help him process the 18 years of guilt and manipulation he'd endured. The reunion between my father and me was complicated by everything we'd both learned about our relationship. He was still the man who'd raised me, but our entire dynamic had been shaped by lies and secrets that would take years to fully understand and overcome. 3 years later, My father and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than hidden guilt. We visit my mother's grave together on important dates, and he tells me stories about the woman I never got to know, but whose love shaped the first 9 months of my life. Sarah Williams is serving life in prison without possibility of parole, her 20-year career of manipulation and murder finally exposed and punished.